Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Dante Douglas, creative advisor in the IP strategy team at Riot Games, as well as a writer and developer that has contributed to games like Get in the Car Loser, and his own personal projects like Nightbloom, Solitary Spacecraft, and Space Wolf Tango. Hi Dante, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's a Saturday. There's not
Yeah,
much going on for me. I hope there's not much going on for you.
absolutely not. Just kind of this is my one big thing for the day, and then I'm going to use the rest of my weekend to do nothing as I usually do.
Well, thank you for letting me be the big thing of your day. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate that. So, Dante, before we get started, I like to
Yeah.
ask, my guests to introduce themselves, give a little bit about, information about themselves, what they feel people should know. But in your case, I'm really hoping, for you to kind of lean into that, just because creative advisor in the IP strategy team, um, and I don't mean this in any negative way. It's not entirely apparent about what that means. So,
No,
could you maybe tell us
it's
about
really
yourself and
not.
what that is?
Yeah, so my name's Dante. If you've encountered me online in the past, you've probably seen me under my main online handle of Video Dante. I worked in, games journalism for a really long time, and then I made the jump over to the industry. And now I'm at Riot Games. I work, yeah, like I said, in a team called IP Strategy, which is a very business-like term. But the practicalities of what I'm doing is a lot of like inter-team coordination, as well as I guess what I would call like lore management. I jokingly had a friend tell me that my title should be lore master, which I think would be really cool. But it is not my actual job title. um, but basically, yeah. Our team and my job is to support the creative folks who are working within the company in making sure that our work is, copacetic, works with what everyone else is working with, and doesn't accidentally step on anyone's toes. We're kind of like air traffic controllers, I suppose. Um,
So, that sounds really neat. So thank you for explaining that. And, I like the air traffic controller kind of thing. So,
yeah,
if I understand correctly, then um, would it be safe to maybe summarize or maybe say it as like if Team A is working on a new character or a
yeah,
new piece of like backstory or just something
yeah,
that you guys are basically running to make sure that that fits in the grand scheme of everything else so that it's not creating like a
exactly.
conflict or headache?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that specifically the way that Riot works, and I do think that this is a pretty admirable general way of working in these sort of larger companies, is that we hold these product teams and their creative directors, their individual contributors, et cetera, to be responsible for the output of their product. Um, and our job is to be responsible for the output of like the entire IP overall, right? So we're there to make sure that there is a voice in the room that says like, hey, we have to be thinking about everyone here, not just the product. Not in an adversarial way, but in a way of saying like, hey, we're all part of one big family, and I know that it's not your job to necessarily be thinking about this in the same way that we do. That's why we're here. So that's kind of our job.
So, and I apologize if this is way off base, but the way you just put it there kind of actually sounds like you guys are HR for the product.
That would be a very dry way of putting it, but not entirely wrong. No, I wouldn't use the term HR just because I feel like that implies that we're, I don't know, running some sort of, uh, our goal is to be collaborative, I guess is what I'll say. Like we're not here to try and say like, hey, these are the hard lines that you have to cross. We're here to say, hey, let's work together. Let's make sure that there's a solution that we can come to that makes everyone happy.
Yeah, and thank you. That makes sense. And yeah, I forgot that in a lot of cases HR is seen kind of as, adversarial or what have you. So thank you
Yeah.
for de drying that. Yeah, I don't know
Totally.
where I was going with that, but thank you. Um, but no, so Dante, that sounds like as a whole, that's pretty interesting. Just because I'm sure a lot of people have looked at like IPs from not just Riot, but like against or across all sorts of mediums. Like I know I certainly have. Where like you look at like Marvel, or you look at DC, or any
Yeah.
big game universe, and you're like, I wonder how that works. Like, um, you know, like the amount of balls that have to stay up in the air as they're juggling to
Yeah.
make sure that for example, like right now, Spider-Man will always have Spider-Man, but there's always so many wheels in motion with like Miles Morales, Silk, Spider-Gwen, like all of that, right?
Yeah.
That they have to make sure they all kind of gel together. Um, so I'm sure people have looked at things like that and been like, who does that? How does that work?
Yeah.
And
It's funny that
it's interesting.
it's funny that you mentioned that too, because literally last night I rewatched Venom with some friends, and I think Venom's a really fun movie. It's a very, whatever. It's one of the better romances of the 2010s, right? But I think that there's it was a very interesting swing from, I think, like the Marvel output as a whole, but also from like Sony, who put it out specifically, because the idea with Venom, which feels like such this archaic way of doing a comic book movie, in my opinion, was that it's a movie about Venom in a world where Venom is the only real like super powered character. It is not, or at least it doesn't feel like it was built to be part of a cohesive larger multiverse or shared universe at all. Um, which is odd because it's coming out, alongside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And yeah, I guess minor spoilers for a movie that came out a couple years back, but there are nods to it in other Marvel products now that point out the fact that, like, hey, Venom is in a different universe from your mainline MCU, which is I don't know. It's one of those things where I have mixed feelings on it. I think it's always really interesting to do these sort of like one-off projects. But I mean, look at me and look at the job that I have. My inclination is like, hey, I feel like this would have been cooler if it was part of a shared universe, or at least if it had some sort of like cohesive nod to the way that it fits within that universe. So I don't know. I go back and forth on it, but overall, as I think a friend of mine put, like, Venom is a mid movie, but it's elite mids. It's a good movie that's not that good. That's my opinion on Venom.
Yeah, I can't speak to it. I don't know. I don't know what this is going to say about me, but I've kind of like refused to watch it on principle, um,
Yeah.
because like I, because we from what I followed of it when it came out, I knew what it was. I knew what they did to it. I
Yeah.
knew what they were doing with it, and
Hmm.
I personally just don't want to be part of what's encouraging that to continue. Because like, look, we got Morbius
Yes.
out of that because of that. Like
Yeah,
I
these are concerns, I would say. uh
So
yeah,
yeah, like I don't want to be part of I don't want to encourage that, as hard and weird as it is to say and try and like have that be my weird line in the sand. But
yes.
like, yeah, I don't know.
I think that's reasonable. I don't know. I would say I have my criticisms of the MCU specifically, and they mostly revolve around the fact that I think that the creative output of the MCU has become somewhat bland, but I don't know. This is neither here nor there. This is just, well, okay, it is. It is actually here because it's related to my job. This is the sort of thing that I think my job tends to revolve around, is questions of, hey, how is this IP organized? How can we learn lessons from that? How can we grow from that? How can we, either adopt practices or away or shy away from practices in larger shared IP spaces?
Yeah, and using kind of using the MCU as an example, whether like as a whole, right?
Oh,
We
it's a
have
big
like
one.
the
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
very it's a very prominent one, I think.
I can definitely say from a fan's perspective, it can definitely be annoying. And I imagine for people in your creative space, in like in your kind of job title or however you want to like frame that,
Mhm.
um, you types of people are probably all sitting there just holding your heads, going, "What's happening?" When they do weird things that just, like I'll use um, Moon Knight, for example, when questioned
Yeah.
about the future, they went, "Well, we don't really know how we were going to fit that in. We just wanted to do it." And like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
I think it's weird because I think there is a how do I put this? There's like a prerogative from people like me, by which I mean people who have my specific types of hyper focus on IP and IP organization stuff and multiverse stuff and shared universe stuff that tends to end up in a almost obsessive desire to catalog everything and put it all into place. And I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned over my past, 2 or 3 years working at Riot, doing the job that I'm doing, is sometimes it's okay for things to be a little sloppy, as long as there is appropriate care being given that it's not, again, stepping on the toes of other material. I'm not sure, for example, where Moon Knight exactly fits chronologically within the MCU, but I think what's interesting about the MCU is that they're actually not super prescriptive about chronological truths, so to speak. There's kind of a slippy space there that we know that like there are large universal things that happen. There's like Thanos' snap and the 5 years in between it. That's a defined period of time. And then there's like pre and post that. And right now it seems like most of the material is just set like linearly within one of those time periods. Either it's within the period of the snap, it's post snap, or it's pre snap. And beyond that point, it's mostly just like, well, what came out after that? Okay, then that was the next chronological event. So I'm sure that if you talked to someone or just talked to some nerd online, you could probably find some sort of like fan created breakdown of the timeline. Um, but I don't think it would have things like years, I don't think it would have things like months or days. It might if you like really went gung ho and trying to like math that out, but I'm not sure if that's something that's being considered on the like overall IP creative level, because I just don't think that's like a huge priority for the MCU. Whereas you could look at something like Star Wars, which I think has a very defined chronology and timeline, like almost down to the day, like not exactly, but like almost. Um, and I admire something like that. But I don't think that the MCU model is necessarily worse or better. It's just a different way of doing it. My concerns with the MCU are not about their IP organization. It's more about like, again, the creative output, I would say. So that's different.
Yeah, and yeah, like that's I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. But no, like I understand what you're saying, and yeah, like there are definitely ways to do things, and one way is not always the right way, and like
Yeah.
whatever is going to allow the freedom to do what works for
Yep.
the organization or work for the story as a whole, I guess. As long as it doesn't kind of push itself into weird places
Yeah.
where you have like Infinite Crisis where you refuse
Yeah.
to, as I understand it, where like you refuse to reset one character, and then that someone makes a reference to something that one character did that
And
never
suddenly
happened for
you've
them,
joined
and
things. Yeah.
yeah, and everything
It's
crumbles down, right?
that's sort of in my mind, that's the nightmare scenario. That's the failure cascade, where someone says, okay, we're doing a reboot, but then the reboot is not like fully implemented. I think DC has this problem a lot because they more um commonly do reboots. Technically speaking, the Marvel universe has never been a reboot. It was, the comics, and I guess the MCU, but it's a lot younger, obviously. But like technically speaking, there has never been a reboot of the Marvel continuity. What Marvel has done is spun up new universes to accommodate alternative, beginning paths or whatever. The Ultimate Universe probably being the most well known of those, right? Because the Ultimate Universe kind of sort of led to the Avengers movie, which means it's pretty crucial to the MCU as a whole. Um, but even the Ultimate Universe, they, if I recall, joined back into the standard Marvel timeline in like 2016 or 2017. I can't remember. Um, you are dredging up a lot of old comics knowledge from my brain. I used to follow Marvel like very religiously. I've kind of fallen off a little bit more recently, but I don't know. They still create good content, from time to time. There's a lot of stuff that I still like there. So
So, very briefly before I move on,
yeah, really.
the Ultimate Universe, as I understood it, did kind of fold back in, but it folded back
Yeah,
in when Doctor Doom kind of got
right. It
God
was
powers.
Secret Wars 2. Secret
Yeah,
Wars. Well, sorry, New Secret Wars. Yeah.
yeah, splits everything apart into
Yes.
multiple things, joins them all into one. So you
And
have
then
like you can be
hmm
walking through New York, and you go from 42nd Street to like
Battle
41st.
World. Like,
And suddenly
it
it's
was
like the 1950s version. It's the noir universe because you just
yeah,
stepped into that because they dropped it. Yeah, that's basically how
what
Ultimate worked, where they just cherry picked who they
uh
wanted to keep, and just everyone else faded off into existence when Reed's son started
yes.
flicking universes off the chart to recreate them. Um,
You are speaking of my favorite Marvel concept of all time, Battle World, a world of battle, where all the worlds are in one world and they battle. I think it is the goofiest thing that they have ever done. And I love saying the word Battle World because I think it's very dumb. It is 90s dumb in a way that I don't expect from Marvel's comics in the modern day. So I don't know, whatever. We can talk about video games if you want.
well, like, that kind of was the goal, because
Sure.
I have you here to talk about video games. Um,
Understandable.
and that's not because I don't like talking about comics. It's just that
Oh yeah,
for me, in terms of comics, I am woefully ill prepared. I am the type of
understandable.
person that will be buying singles and then
Oh yeah,
won't read them until I have a thick stack of them. And it's like one of those things where it's like I think about it every. The times that I do have a big haul of like 6 comics, yeah, that's
yeah,
big for me.
yeah.
That I look at it and be like, I should just be buying trades. But it's
Yeah, it is. The American comics industry has some problems, and I would say, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems, and why they're getting their butts kicked by manga these days, is manga focuses on the trades. It focuses on collected volumes, which are just easier to digest. You could buy a collected volume and be like, even if you get, volume 3 out of 16, it's probably a full story in there. It's because it's like novel length. Like you're getting a full story. I wish that is how American comics were packaged, but they're just not, and that's annoying to me.
like, what, Dante, are you trying to tell me that the early 2010 run of Venom, you didn't appreciate that it went Spider Island, Venom 1,
Oh my
Venom
god.
2, Venom Circle of Six, and then just kept making weird title names? So if you were trying
If
to find the third, the fourth, the fifth, they didn't exist. And then they decided to republish them all, but instead of having it be like Circle of Six and whatever came next, combining them into two. But to do that, they also had to
oh my god.
revamp how two worked, so that way you could use the original one, but then a new two because that doesn't work any. Like, are you trying to
I
tell me that just doesn't work for you?
let me tell you a fun story. So I mentioned that I've kind of fallen off of the Cape comics. Like I don't read them as regularly as I used to, but because I have a different new obsession for my brain, I have been reading all of the Star Wars comics, the new Star Wars comics by Marvel. I haven't dipped into the Legend stuff because there's literally mountains of that, and there would be no way that I would ever read all those. But the new Star Wars comics, which I think are by and large incredibly solid. And last year they did something that was the most egregious logical maneuver I think that they could have done, which is that they slipped into what I would call Marvel disease, where in order to actually read it chronologically, you had to be jumping between 5 different runs on an almost issue by issue basis. So you would go from like Dr. Aphra 35 to Star Wars 35 to War of the Bounty Hunters 1 to Forlom and Zuckuss 2 or something. I'm just like, this is awful. This is awful. This is the worst thing about, I think, modern American comics is this tendency to split stories between different contiguous runs. And you can usually, after the fact, buy some sort of collected volume that has like, here's all of them in order. But while they're being published, it's you just have to find each floppy individually, and it is a pain in the butt. I do not recommend it, even if, man, some of those covers are real good. But I absolutely abhorred their War of the Bounty Hunters crossover arc. I'm sorry if anyone listening to this has worked on that. I think there were some interesting ideas there, but the actual release logic was bizarre to me.
Yeah, I abhor that as well. Like, I always hate trying to organize the short box, because
Yeah,
screw long boxes. If anyone's ever like, oh, long box is fine, you try lifting a full long box, especially if
it's
you've double
it's too
packaged
much. It's
too.
too much.
Yeah, exactly. But I always hate like looking at it and being like, okay, so we have like, 1, 2. other series,
Yeah,
other series, other series, three, other series, others. It's like, oh, come on.
exactly.
It's like, I just,
Exactly.
and it
And
takes
digitally,
work.
it's a little easier. You just still have to assemble some sort of reading playlist. It's whatever. I love comic books. They're great. They're a great medium. When I read a good comic book, they or like a good graphic novel, whatever, I I love video games. I've loved video games my entire life. I think video games are probably some of the coolest ways to tell story ever invented by humankind. Um, but when I read a good graphic novel, I'm like, no, this is it. This is the superior medium. Like, why? We should give up on everything else. We should go back to creating graphic novels. I just finished Kate Beaton's Ducks, which is a memoir about her life. Kate Beaton, who you probably know from Hark a Vagrant, among other really good like webcomic stuff. Um, did this absolutely gorgeous memoir of her life in the form of a graphic novel, and it is heartbreaking and beautiful and just gorgeously illustrated. Called Ducks. So highly recommend that. That's my comics recommendation. Read that.
Oh, I've made a note of that, so I will take a look at that later. I assure you of
Absolutely.
that one. Um, so Dante, as I said, because
Yeah,
well,
let's talk about video games.
I'm sure we could talk about comics for a while, but I would just be outclassed
Sure.
very quickly at this point now. But you mentioned how you kind of got into it, how you started like
Hmm.
doing writing like reviews stuff
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
publications, and then you got into it. Can you maybe like elaborate on that a little bit, if you don't
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah. So, I I have loved video games since I was very young, and then I got older, and I want to say probably early 2010s, started being involved in some like indie development scenes in my area. I mentioned this before recording, but you recently had on Riv, RH, who is actually a person who was part of that very early years for me. We both lived in the same tiny Oregon town, and so I met him somewhat early in, I don't know, like mid 2010s or something, and we would all like go to the same like game dev meetups and stuff. I love Riv, he's great. um but after kind of being involved in those local scenes for a while, and I liked writing. I've been a writer for a long time. I got into the games journalism space. I worked as a freelancer for, I don't know, 4 years or something. Like again, mid 2010s, I wrote for a lot of websites, mostly on Paste Magazine, but also for Waypoint Vice, for Polygon a couple times. Just kind of wherever I would do things like that. And it got me really, I would say, involved in the video game discursive space, in sort of the discourse as it is, as well as at the time I was going to, well, for a minute there, in the middle of the 2010s, I was going to college. And so I was really involved in more the academic side of game studies. Um, and I, I don't know, I liked games. I liked thinking about games. I liked writing about games and doing criticism work. And it wasn't until I think about 2018 that I was actually approached for a job in the industry. And then I joined Riot, and then my obviously kind of my focus shifted, um, and I wasn't doing quite as much like public criticism of games. This is probably the most public I've been about like my job or like video games in quite a while now. And yeah, I moved from kind of working on some what I would call like internal archival tools at Riot to doing the job that I do now. So that's my very abbreviated history of video games.
So, thank you for walking through or, explaining that, walking us through that.
Hmm.
And, based on the experiences that you've had, and yours are going to be a little different, as everyone's
Hmm.
always are. But yours, more so because of how you started. But,
Yeah.
do you have any words of wisdom that you can share from those experiences for people that might be looking to also follow suit?
Yes. I mean, first, I think this really depends on like what you're trying to aim for, right? When I was working in games journalism, I would say my goals were very different than working in the games industry. Uh, that said, games journalism, if you have been paying attention at all over the past couple of years, is a kind of a crapshoot when it comes to job stability and pay, and it sucks in many ways. And I say it sucks from a very empathetic position. I am a huge believer in the games journalism space. I think it is incredibly important for the future of the medium. And I wish things were better. However, they're not right now. And I really, really hope that we can have some more stability in that space soon. Anyway, my actual words of wisdom, which I learned from someone else who I cannot remember who, but probably at an early like GDC or something that I went to, someone said like, it's good to meet your heroes. That's cool. They can often offer you like a bunch of legs up. They can open the door for you into certain places, but the people who are going to make your career is your cohort. And by that I mean that in a very expansive sense. The people who you met who were like working as freelancers when you were, or like scrambling for games jobs when you were, those are the people who you should be making connections with, because those are the people who are going to give you legs up as you move forward. The only reason I have my job at Riot as I currently do is because I worked with the woman who offered me a job with Riot like years before. I had done some writing for, at the time, her website that she was an editor of. I wrote some articles there, and she was impressed with my work. And she, we had kept contact. And when she moved to Riot a few years later, she offered me a job at Riot. That's the connection that I think, really gave me a foot in the door. Um, and that wasn't because she was like, like my hero at the time. I mean, she's great. Of course, she's my hero. She's awesome. Her name's Laura Mache. She's wonderful. But I wasn't like looking up to her and like asking like, hey, can I please get a job? It was more like, no, we're peers. And when she got a job, she's the type of person who would open that door for other folks. Um, and that's like legitimately, I think that's the most important thing. And that can be whether you're talking in the journalism space, as I was, or you're in the indie space. I mentioned that I've known Riv for quite a long time. The reason I knew Riv is because I went to local game dev meetups, and Riv was there, and a couple other folks were there. The folks from what is now called Doinksoft, Colin and Britt, who recently released a game called Demon Throttle. They also made Gato Roboto. They're working on a new game called Gunbrella. Also know them from the same indie dev scene, where we all were goofing around and making crappy little jam games or whatever. And a couple of us, made some connections, and a couple of us made some material that actually got some content and got some like some serious backing and stuff. And those are the folks who you should be leaning on and making strong connections with, in my very strong opinion. Talk to your peers, make connections with your peers. um, they're going to be the folks who help you through things.
So, thank you for that advice. That advice is absolutely fantastic, I feel. Because like networking is always something that people stress on. However,
Yeah.
you've kind of covered why networking, like
Yes.
what the outcome of networking can be. Because
Yeah.
we've all heard the tale of like, yeah, go to local events, shake hands with people. You
Yeah.
never know
Yeah.
who's gonna whatever, right? But like you've you've actually gave concrete examples of what that networking actually looks like and what it
Yeah.
has actually done outside of just saying, oh yeah, it went well. Because and
Yeah.
I don't know why that's the case with networking, that people always just, oh yeah, it went well, like that. They don't,
I think.
they brush it off, and it's always one of those things where it's like, you're not selling me on why
Yeah.
networking is important when all you do is, oh, it went well.
I think what it really is, at least in my opinion, is that there's a difference between networking with the intention, again, of meeting your heroes, and networking with the intention of making genuine connections with folks kind of in your peer circles. And the former, like I said, is great, and you can make some really fun connections that way, and maybe they'll work out great. But the latter, in my experience, is what matters. The folks who I met who were like, again, peers in my space are the folks who I still talk to. They're the folks, many of whom have jobs in the industry, or are pursuing jobs in the industry, and we're all trying to help them out on those sort of things. But that's where the genuine connections are made, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, thank you, because that's, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And like I said, it actually adding something quantitative, I don't know if that's the right
Totally.
word,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
it
I mean,
is fantastic, is great. So I do want to ask as well,
yeah.
because you had mentioned that you started with game journalism, you took some classes for I forget the exact class that you called it. Sorry.
Game studies in general, I'd say. I
Thank
took a
you.
couple of those, yeah.
And then like from A to B to C, right? Um,
Mhm.
I am curious though, what was the game that changed your life? Like, what was the game that was your favorite game that kind of made you go, "Oh, this is
Oh,
what I want to do. This is what my life needs to be."
yeah, easy answer. No question for me. Morrowind. It was Morrowind. Um, I got Morrowind. Okay, Morrowind came out what, like 2002 or 3 or something? I don't know. The point is, I didn't play it until probably 2005 or 6 or something because I did not have a hot new console at the time, and I got it on the classic tale, I think, of many a millennial of there was a family computer in the living room and I kind of stole it and put it in my room and it became my computer. Um, and that computer, if I recall at the time, had a 64 megabyte video card, which was not a lot for the time. And one of the few things it could run well was Morrowind, and Morrowind blew my mind. Morrowind changed my life. I had no idea video games could do that. I was like, you can just run around and there's like quests and there's all these people and it's this weird world, and like I just remember like I was like terrified of parts of Morrowind because I was like, I don't know, I guess I would have been like 13, 14, something like that. Um and I was I wouldn't say I'm particularly good at video games. I don't think I've ever been particularly good at video games, but there are parts of Morrowind where you're like just kind of like wandering around in like the fog, and especially the fog because I had a 64 megabyte video card, which means it was not rendering far out. Um, and just like these creepy tunnels and these like weird dwarven mines and this weird the ashlands and the yurts and the silt striders and all this stuff that was just like, oh my god, I've never seen a game like this. It blew my mind. And once I kind of got over the initial shock of, wow, this game is really cool, I discovered modding for it, which, if you know anything about the Elder Scrolls games modding scene, it's expansive. And at the time, it was pretty expansive. This was like before, I think Nexus mods might have been around, but I think it was kind of before Nexus mods was like the only game in town. So I would just like Google search Morrowind mods and like click on all the links that came up. And I remember there was this one like real old internet style, someone had a page of links that was just a page of links to various mods. And I would just download and try like all those. And I was so enthralled by this possibility that you could like do so much with this video game. Um, I think one of the first actual quote unquote video game projects that I tried was like using RPG Maker XP to create a Morrowind fan game. I never finished it. I never released it, but like, it was the thing I would noodle on after high school or whatever. Or like after classes were done in high school, right? And I was enthralled by Morrowind. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Like, so that really set me down a path of like, I want to do this. I want to do this thing. This is cool. Um, and I absolutely failed to ever create anything that was like inspired by Morrowind exactly. Like I didn't like create any mods or anything like that, even though I thought that was really cool. But I did like, I got really into later like Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas and like their kind of modding scenes, which were similarly large, I think. Um, and yeah, I mean, it was Morrowind. No question. Easy answer.
So, that's fantastic to hear because I tried to get into Morrowind when I was younger, and
Oh, it's
um,
rough. It's
yeah,
rough. Yeah.
exactly. Um,
Um,
I think my because like I went out, I had a job at like a restaurant. Like I'm gonna use my money. I'm gonna buy this game, and I
yeah.
think I played it for like 30 minutes. And was like, nope.
I
Um,
think the weird thing about Morrowind for me is that before I had the game, like before I got it in, like I said, probably like 2006 or 7, something in that range, um, I had watched an older family member play it on Xbox, probably around the time of release, right? So like 2002 or 3. And I remember at the time, this is your classic, like, younger cousin at watching the older cousin play video games experience, where I was just like nagging his shoulder constantly, like, can I play? Can I play? Hey, can I play? Hey, after you die, can I play? And like never let me play at all. But like, um, but I was, but like that experience was so burned into my brain as like as just like, wow, this game is amazing. And I just remembered it from that one experience so much that when I did get the game, I like devoured it, you know.
So, I imagine just based on my own experiences of Morrowind when I first started or first tried playing it, getting
Yep.
killed by the same crab or
Yes.
or doing what most people probably did the first time, which
Yeah.
was watch a wizard fall from the sky, go, "Oh, let me
Yep.
try this," fly into the air and die.
And then die.
Um,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I imagine every time you saw him fight and die, because it probably happened a
Yeah,
lot,
probably.
you
Yeah.
probably got your hopes up a lot, like, "Oh, it's gonna be my turn now." And then, they just reload and
Yeah.
keep going, right?
Well, 100% because I was like an 8-year-old. I was probably being an annoying kid. But I think what it really was for me is seeing a game that was so open-ended and was so like kind of narratively focused was just not something I had ever experienced before. Because like, when I was like really young, I'd played like Super Nintendo or whatever, right? Like I played like Mario games. And even when I was younger, I had a PS1 and I had Final Fantasy 9, which I would also count as like a very foundational early game for me. But that's a very linear game, right? Like the Final Fantasy games, especially of that era are pretty linear. Um, and just seeing that a game could just be a giant place that you explored was just it shattered my paradigm of what video games could be. Um, just to realize that like, oh, they dock you in Satanine, and then you're kind of just off to do whatever. Like you can check out all these wild cities that you like hear rumors about, and I love the way that Morrowind did that, where it was like it was less of map markers, which is now the de facto way of doing this, and more of like you would talk to someone and they'd be like, "I heard they have pyramids in Vivek," and then you're like, "What? They have what in where?" And then you have to like and then you talk to someone else and you're like, "Where's Vivek?" And they'll be like, "Oh, it's to the east." And then you're like, "Whoa, what?" And then you just kind of walk east until hopefully you find it. And it just felt so it was mind blowing. It was so cool.
Y-
Yeah.
You know, I I can definitely appreciate that sense of explore, like wander,
Yeah.
exploration, because like for me, and this is something that I personally, like a lot of people, but from like Morrowind to Oblivion to
Hmm.
Skyrim, and I'm sure to I forget the title for six, but I'm sure
Yeah,
like the
whatever that
same
one is.
kind of discourse will exist. And for
Yeah.
me, the biggest discourse I truly had between because Oblivion I played a lot of. Oblivion was a
Right.
game for me
Yeah.
that was like, oh wow, this
Hmm.
is how this can work. This is awesome.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, but the biggest discourse, or what have you, I had between Oblivion and Skyrim wasn't like the magic system being devalued, the crafting system being devalued, any of that. It was the
Yeah.
fact that in Oblivion, I would literally just jump on a horse and go from inn to inn to inn.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved the fact that there
It
was
was
like
cool.
you could ride up into the mountain, a mountainous area, snow would
Yeah.
start falling, and there'd be an inn nestled like just off the
Yep.
road, right?
There's a
Skyrim had none of that. It just like I think there was
yeah.
like three, four inns in Skyrim outside of like actual towns, and it that was
Yeah.
my biggest like loss of wonder or wander
It's
was
very
like not happening.
yeah, it's odd. Like I think I pretty dramatically and quickly lost interest in the Elder Scrolls game post Morrowind, but also post Oblivion. I never got super into Oblivion, mostly because if you recall, my computer at the time was like not at all capable of running Oblivion. And then like by the time I got a better computer, like Oblivion was old news. So I never really had an Oblivion phase, but I know for a lot of folks that's kind of their equivalent of my wonder at Morrowind because they were a little younger or they just like got into the game later or whatever. But um, I I think the thing that really drew me to things like Morrowind, and to a lesser extent Oblivion, was that feeling of like intentional design in this massive world. And it is something that I think Skyrim kind of just like missed for me. I think that a lot of the flaws of Morrowind are things that I now look back on very fondly, especially in the comparatively frictionless game of Skyrim, where like this is a very minor thing, but people have pointed out that like Skyrim dungeons are built such that when you reach the end, there's almost always a secret door that leads you right back to the beginning, so you can just leave, which is a super player friendly thing. And Morrowind didn't have that at all. Like Morrowind, a dungeon was a weird little cave, and at the end of it, you had to remember how to get out. um, and I think it added to the sense of wonder, and also I think in my mind uh, took me kept me in the fiction more because I didn't feel like, oh, there's a door here so that I can leave and do my next quest, you know? And I think Skyrim really suffers from that, even if there's things about Skyrim that I think are cool, but it just did not hold my attention, I think.
And that's like that's perfectly valid and fair. Like
Mhm.
different things for different people, right? And you
Yeah,
know,
totally.
yeah, like I'm not going to be the person to try and sway you on that. Like
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
my place. It's like I said, different things for different people, and yeah, like
Hmm.
that's perfectly valid. And I think many people probably can easily relate and understand to
Yeah.
what where your issues lie. And like I spoke with someone, not for the podcast, but I spoke with someone, and like they were upset that they couldn't get into it.
Yeah.
Because like they wanted to, they liked the idea of it, but like, yeah, just some things are not conducive to how they want to enjoy it, right? And like
Yeah.
that's perfectly valid, perfectly fine, end of day, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dante, I'm I don't know if this is I have a feeling this might kind of step into more Morrowind talk, and if it does, that's perfectly fine. But what is it about games that like makes them enjoyable to you?
It's odd. I think this might touch on some Morrowind things, but if anything, it's going to say that like I think my taste in games has changed pretty heavily. In not like in what I appreciate, but in the things that I gravitate toward. And I think a lot of it is just because I'm older now and because of the pandemic, the novel coronavirus, that meant that I was just like indoors a lot more and I was looking for things to de-stress, not things to necessarily heavily engage my brain in. But what I've found is, generally speaking, if I'm looking to enjoy a game, I'm looking for one of two modes. I'm looking for either a heavy systemic experience or a heavy narrative experience. Um, and sometimes it's both, but then the game has to be really good. And by heavy systemic, I mean like one of my favorite games right now is just like the broad genre of city builder, which I think overlaps with like tycoon games or even like what are now known as like Factorio alikes, like where you're creating a thing to create a thing to create a thing type of things. Um, and city builders are a lot like that because for me that's just like it's the same satisfaction of sitting down and solving a puzzle. It's just like I am learning a little systemic thing and I can, and if it's a city builder like City Skylines or whatever, I can also sit down and play with my fake little dollhouse and put trees around and make it look pretty and stuff, which is also satisfying. But there's basically no narrative meat on the bone for City Skylines. um and then on the other hand, there's things like I don't know, like Disco Elysium or Night in the Woods or more recently Pentiment that are just like these are heavy narrative experiences for me, and I like them because I can sort of devote 100% of my brain to that and just sink into this world. Um, but oddly, I think that the thing that I've lost a lot of taste for is games like Morrowind, even if it was something that was like super super important to me and it will always be. The mechanical friction coupled with the sort of overall barrenness of the narrative experience in a game like that, or I think in a more modern sense, like the modern AAA mega genre of like open world narrative action RPG thing, it's just rare that I'm reaching for those. They're not at the top of my pile usually.
And that's like, I completely understand and agree that, as you get older,
Yeah,
different games start to speak to you differently, right? Like,
totally.
for me, certain games just clicked after I played
Yeah,
the one game, and like, oh, okay, this is
yeah.
how this works. Um,
Hmm.
for example, like roguelikes, for example, for me, it wasn't, I
Yeah,
forget what it was, but one of them just clicked. And I'm like, oh, I understand how this works now. Um, and now I'm a fan of that whole genre.
yeah,
But
totally.
like it makes perfect sense that as you get older, you as a person change. So
Yeah,
why wouldn't the games that would interest you change, right? And you
absolutely.
know, like you said, with the pandemic hitting and a lot of a lot of people's what have you just being immediately thrown against the wall.
Hmm.
Um, I imagine, like that probably did it to a lot of other people. And um, from the sounds of it, and I don't mean to like try and speak down to this, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like, the games that really changed or spoke to were games that just let you ignore ignore the very real fact our
Yeah,
world was kind of crumbling around us.
yeah.
Is
I
that
mean,
accurate?
I definitely think that was part of it. I mean, I think, yeah, obviously, city builders offer me a fun fantasy of what if cities didn't stuck butt in America. That would be cool. Um, but like in another way, like I became very into historical stuff in the past year. I listened to the entirety of the History of Rome podcast. Great listen. Um, and that like set me down this path of becoming a guy who's really obsessed with history. So obviously, when something like Pentiment or a similar thing comes out, I really love the attention to detail in a good period piece because it allows me to do a bit of escapism, right? Like it allows me to feel like I am not in this particular historical moment.
You know, yeah, and like that's also a very important thing to like to keep in mind that
Mhm.
that escapism isn't always. I think the word escapism has like a negative connotation to it, and I
It
think
does.
that's
I mean,
probably not the best
I've
way in
written
some cases.
I have written about how I don't like the word escapism, and I think I agree with that still. But also, it's sort of, I mean, there's a reason it's popular. Like it allows you to not think about your current situation. Like I think when I was a younger man, I was not looking for that as much. And for various reasons, I think that's something that I wouldn't say I'm looking for necessarily as much these days, but I appreciate it, when I can get it, I guess. I don't dislike it.
Yeah, and I think the hitch that I just had was realizing it's sort of like like the word nostalgia, that it has this like
Yeah.
rain cloud sitting over it, that people are like, oh well, you're nostalgic for this, for because it's the wrong reasons. But it's like, well,
I-
no, it's like you can be nostalgic for something and kind of have escapism for something as well, for something that just because you like it puts you in a good place. Like it doesn't mean you have to be trapped there. It doesn't mean you have to
yeah.
be like only ignoring the negative parts of that era as well. Like, people are like, oh, well, you're nostalgic for the 90s, but there was no technology, there was no internet. It's like, well, for some people that's a plus. So you don't
Yeah.
don't go down that road. What I
I think
mean, like,
there's a there's a worrying tendency to be, I would say, cloister yourself in nostalgia, right? Like that's not
mhm,
uncommon. But that doesn't mean that all nostalgia is de facto bad, right? I
yeah,
think there's less. Again, I became a history dork. Like I think there are lessons to be learned from previous eras.
yeah. I actually just realized the thing that I was struggling, like I was working towards, and it's the idea of romanticizing the
Yeah.
escapism or the nostalgia.
Yes. Yeah.
That's I think the big asterisk. It's like, it's all fine as long as you're not romanticizing it, right? And like,
Yeah.
you saying you like a good history piece. Um, for me, there's a series on a long running series. I think it started on the PlayStation or maybe the PlayStation 2. I don't remember. I started on the second game, so this is why I don't know.
Right.
But it's called like Way of the Samurai, and
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of a historical period piece of just of the different eras of running up to when the Age of the Samurai kind of
Hmm.
died off in Japan. And it's kind of
Hmm.
like a Forrest Gump thing where your character gets dumped into a whole bunch of scenarios,
Right.
or a
Yeah.
period where there's just all these major events that you participate in, but it's like,
You
well,
happen to
okay.
be there for. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and like I love those games. They're kind of janky,
Hmm.
super janky in some cases, but like, it's not, I'm not romanticizing it when I play it. I just like that era. I like the idea. I like
Yeah.
the way everything's presented. There's a new coming out. Well, right now we're almost in February. So coming out in February is one of the Way of the Dragons, formerly Yakuza games, where they did
Right.
a
Yes. Yeah.
period piece in historical Japan where you
Right.
play as a buck wild samurai. And I
Yeah.
say buck wild because we don't have time to discuss it. We don't have time to to dive into it if you don't know or if anyone doesn't know. So I just say watch a trailer on YouTube or watch like a
Sure.
rundown of it. It makes perfect sense why it's buck wild.
Right.
It's historical in the sense of the events are true, but I highly doubt, the one of the real styles that they used during that era was, jumping around, doing backflips and shooting people and throwing sword or whatever. It's buck
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
It's a Yakuza game. It's the
Yeah.
it's a Yakuza game. Is all I can really
I
have to say for people that know.
I was yeah, I have played a couple of those. I absolutely loved Yakuza 0, as I think many people did. And then I played Kiwami 1, which was the remake of 1. And yeah, I think those games are fun as heck. They're great. I love the amount of personality that they're able to squeeze into and out of a very small physical space is, again, very admirable. I think there's this concept, right, in game design and in-game studies of the one block video game. Forgive me, I do not remember who coined that term originally, but the one block video game being the game that has the same amount of detail as a real world block, thus functionally infinite, or at least it feels functionally infinite. And honestly, I think the Yakuza games are a brilliant example of that, where like Kamurocho is a relatively small physical space. It's an open world, but it's a really small open world. Um, but the amount of things that are crammed in there, the little nooks and crannies, the shops, the Don Quixote that is just like lovingly rendered the interior for no reason. You don't need to see the interior of that store. Like mechanically it doesn't serve any purpose, but like the the fact that they did it is to say, like, this is a deep world. Like, it's not a super wide world, but it's a very deep world, and that is admirable and really, really cool to me. I think the other game that recently has come up a lot when you talk about the one block video game is Disco Elysium, which I also 100% agree with. Disco Elysium is a relatively small open world that is very dense, very detailed, lots of characters, lots of narrative to pick through. And I love games like that. Like if I'm in the mood, if I can get if I can get my brain to calm down and just like be in one space, those are lovely.
Yeah, and I can definitely understand that. And like I think I haven't played Disco Elysium yet. It's on the list, but like as I'm sure you and many other people
The
can
list is long. Yeah.
yeah, can also like regretfully like acknowledge and kind of
Yeah.
empathetically feel is that like, the list never ends and
The
it's
list
like
never ends.
it's just yeah, anyway. It's on there. It's waiting to get there. And like I I realized when you were talking like when you were describing Don Quixote in the Yakuza games,
Yeah.
um that it's so crafted, it's so detailed, and a lot of stuff is in that game. And
Yeah.
like I think the best way to, and this is going to sound really weird for people that aren't aware of this kind of like philosophical approach that Japanese um companies, certain Japanese companies seem to have, especially like the bespoke ones where like they take a process, take uh a way something works and they hone on it so well. Like
Yeah.
if it's a huge rabbit hole if you don't know or if anyone doesn't know and they want to go down it. But like you can find videos online of like a Japanese shoe signing shining
Yeah.
not signing shining business what have you, and like all they do is shine shoes or make
Yeah.
glasses or what have you, and like the amount of care and precision, like it's the approach they take is like this philosophical one of like this is how you do it and this is how you do it real well. And like the design process behind like Yakuza kind of, I just realized, kind of has that, is that it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
they've looked at it and went, oh, we can do this, but they've taken like the utmost respect and care to be able to say, but we're gonna do it.
The
We're like
best.
they took
Yeah.
that philosophical standpoint for it, right? But anyway, but yeah, like it's great to hear that like that's how that works for you, and like just the yeah, yeah. Sorry, I don't know where I was going to go with
Oh,
that
it's
one.
totally fine. Yeah.
Um, so Dante, I am curious as well, because
Yeah.
I like to, when I talk to people, I also like to talk about who they are, and a
Yeah.
lot of who people are what they do,
Mhm.
obviously, but at the same time, uh, you're not confined to a box, and if the answer to this is, well, video games, well, that's perfectly fine as well.
Yeah.
But outside of video games, do you have any other hobbies? And if so, like what else do you enjoy? What else do you do?
Um, yeah, it's a lot of video games, unfortunately, but but I would say outside of it, I mean, I love movies. We talked a lot about comic books earlier, so surprise, surprise, I'm also into comic books. But I like I like to I like to have a diverse media diet. I will say that the actual truth of that sort of varies from time to time, but I love watching movies. I have a letterboxd account that I'm very active on. It's also Video Dante if you're curious. But yeah, I love watching movies. I like reading a lot. I like comic books. Like I said, I'm trying to keep up with the Star Wars comics right now, so that's sort of my big comic thing. Um, as far as like non-media stuff, I love cooking and I like biking. Those are my two things outside of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, mostly it's like my job is a lot about, IP and creative output, and therefore I think one of the things that I think is important for me, not just for my job, but because I like it, is maintaining a diverse media diet and watching a lot of movies, trying to keep up on the stuff that people think is quote unquote great.
So, with that in mind, then I'm gonna kind of maybe hit you with a bit of a lightning round,
Yeah,
I guess you'd say, quote unquote.
please. I have plenty of time for the record. We're good here. So yeah.
Um, but because we've just kind of started 2023. It's as of
Hmm.
recording today, we're January 21st. So we're
Yeah,
just in the
right
baby
there.
steps of the
Yeah,
year. So for like 2022, because you said you like to watch movies and all that.
yeah.
What? Let's go with like a handful. You can define handful in this case,
Sure, sure, sure,
but
sure.
like what would your handful of recommendations or picks from 2022 be movie wise?
Oh man, I'm going to cheat slightly and look at my letterboxd because I know I have some stuff there. Um, but yeah, okay, easy stuff. Everything Everywhere All at Once was absolutely amazing, mind-blowingly good. It made me cry in the theater. So good. Um, I also absolutely love Jordan Peele's Nope. I've been a fan of obviously his movies since Get Out. They've been pretty much all bangers. I think Us was maybe not as good as Get Out, but I think Nope is his best film yet. I think it's just absolutely full of just amazing detail work, gorgeous shots, deeply, deeply terrifying. Um, there's some there's some stuff in the middle of that movie that is going to stick with me for life, and I love it. I'm a big fan of horror like that. Um, I really liked Turning Red, as far as like more younger fare goes. I thought that was a really cute movie. I really liked it. Um, I saw, speaking of other like cute, smaller kids movies, Wendell and Wild, which among other things was produced by Key and Peele, again Jordan Peele again, but it's a stop motion film, and the thing about stop motion films is, even if they're not good, they're amazing to look at. Like, and I thought Wendell and Wild was just this really really lovely. it's a Halloween story. It's the type of thing that I would show to a kid and like sort of sort of force it into being a Halloween tradition. Just because I mean it's cute, it's queer, it's diverse, it's very clearly for kids, it's funny. I love Key and Peele's characters in it. Like I had a really good time with that. That was really fun. We watched that with some friends for like a Halloween thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. Those were probably my big like movies from last year. I'm pretty sure all those came out last year. I might be wrong. I don't know. Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. I think it was a relatively good year for movies. Relatively, I'd say that. I'm downplaying it, but you get the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so the amount of movies on that short list that you gave, I've only seen two of them, and both of them in my case were Turning Red and Nope.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I enjoyed Turning Red. I thought I listened to the thought process behind it.
Hmm.
I'm from Canada, so like for me
Yep.
as well, it was just I'm not from Toronto, but for me as well,
Yeah.
it's a Canadian movie, right?
It
Like
is. Yeah. Yeah.
and that
Very
that
deeply, I think.
that meant more to me
Yeah.
um, than than a lot of like everything else that went to it. Like that was one of
Totally.
like the star moments for me. It was a Canadian film.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but speaking of Nope, I've also seen Jordan Peele's his other movies.
Yep.
Get Out, Us,
Hmm.
and Nope. I liked all of them. They were uh I don't know the right word. I'm just gonna say thought provoking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they
That we'll
are
use
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the word that's not the right word that I
Sure.
think
Sure. Sure.
needs to be used here. But for me, they were thought provoking. They were
Hmm.
great. They what have you. Um, and one of the for Nope, one of my favorite scenes in Nope was the Akira reference for me.
Yeah. Of
Um,
course.
any
Yeah.
anytime there's an Akira slide in anything, I'm on board.
That was
Um,
funny because I remember seeing that particular shot and being like, if it was a lesser director, I would hate this. But I think Jordan Peele pulls it off, and it's not that I don't like it. Of course, I love an Akira slide. Akira slides are great. It's what I always kind of view them as like it's such an obvious visual reference that like you have to pull it off,
yeah.
and I think it requires like such context around it to make it work. And I think Nope makes it work, but also I was like, oh man, this is on the line, but I'll let it slide. I think it's cool, you know.
Well, the thing that sealed it for me was I saw Nope in theaters, and
Yeah.
I like as it happens, I like lean over to my girlfriend. I'm like, oh, Akira slide, because as
Oh,
is
totally.
what anyone that knows about the Akira slide, they are contractually obligated to do. Um, and she hasn't seen Akira, so she's like, okay, sure, whatever, leave me alone. We're watching a movie.
Yeah,
But then
absolutely.
like on Twitter, I see like a clip it from a news article where someone was like, "So was that an Akira slide?" He goes, "I love Akira." It's like, okay, that was intentional. Like that's what sealed it for me. Because
Yeah,
like I don't I don't know about you, but I've definitely seen people that don't know what the Akira slide is try and do it because
yeah.
like, oh, I've seen this, it's cool, and it's like, well, you should know what you're doing before you try and do it. Just um, because
You got to know what you're doing. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, but I don't. Nope's been out long enough. I don't think it's an issue to maybe tread into what
I
could be
yeah.
a spoiler, right? But if anyone's listening and they don't like it, just give us like 2 minutes, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm gonna say, was the thing that sticks with you the sound after inhaling everything and the
Oh no! Oddly,
oh
I was gonna say the Gordy scene.
the what
That
scene?
was the monkey scene.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
that's the one
okay.
that like pure visceral horror. Some really, really good use of what I think just like brought all the themes of the movie together into one deeply horrifying scene that I love. I love it. It was gorgeous. It was disgusting and terrifying. It's exactly what I love in horror. I love when horror makes me feel like just truly alien.
Yeah.
Again, Alien, all of these. I what I really appreciate about that movie is how it feels so considered. Like every scene is so considered. Every line is so considered. There's an early line that I think about so much because I remember when I was watching, I was like, that's a weird thing to say, and then I was like, oh my god. And it's super early. It's when main character's sister says she sees like a caterpillar or something, or like a grasshopper, and she specifically says to the grasshopper, because she like flicks it off of like a, I don't know, she flicks it off of something, and then she says, if I see you again, I'm going to eat you. And I was like, oh my god. Like, that's the movie, that's the thesis of the movie, right? That's the thesis of this creature's mo. Anyway, just amazing screenwriting in that movie.
hmm And like, to speak more to Nope, because I
Yeah,
really enjoyed that movie. I thought that movie was absolutely fantastic.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the most terrifying part of the Gordy scene isn't that it's because like when you watch a horror movie, right?
yeah,
Regardless of what the big threat is, it's a horror movie. Like
yeah,
even the more realistic horror movies, quote unquote, like let's say like Scream, for example,
right.
that realistically that would be shut down real quick.
Hmm.
With if people aren't in the horror movie script where they're like, oh, gotta run away. Like, well, no, grab that
Yeah,
frying pan, solve this,
yep, yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Get it over. Like you have a chair, there that's more than an arms round. Get like anyway. But like that scene was real. Like that was a
Yeah.
scene that, even people that stand like in the post office line thinking of, oh, if someone came in to hold this up, this is how I would be the hero, right?
Yeah.
As I'm sure everyone does, because everyone does it. Let's not pretend.
To,
But like the Gordy
yeah,
scene, there's that is like the one scene where in my mind it's like no one,
no
the
one.
only thing to do there is to actually hide or run,
Yeah,
right?
I
That is real horror to me.
that's the part of it that I think really stuck with me is, yeah, the feeling of like, oh, there's no counter argument to this. There's no like, oh, I'd I'd pick up a weapon. It's like, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah,
You'd try and get out of there as fast as possible, and you'd probably not make it, and that's
yeah.
terrifying. One of the things that I think about a lot, again, to sort of veer it back towards video games, is there was a talk, God, it would have been over a decade ago, by the studio who makes Amnesia, the Amnesia games. And I'm blanking on their name right now, but the point is, they had this really lovely talk that has always stuck with me, because so previously to creating the Amnesia games, they had another series of games that were sort of like survival horror games. And in those games, so if you remember the discourse around Amnesia, the big discourse around Amnesia was that it was a survival horror game where you didn't have a weapon. That was like really novel at the time. Was people being like, "Oh, like there's no weapon. It's not like a Resident Evil. You don't have a gun. Um, you can only run." And that, I think, contributed to that game like being such a cult hit at the time it came out. Um, but the developers had this really interesting talk where they said that even in their previous games, they'd never given the player a weapon. Like that was a big part of their like design modus, was they were like, well, we never want to give the player a weapon. We'll give the player tools. We'll give them like a pickaxe or like a hammer or something. And what they found was that even if they gave the player a non-violent tool, the player would not be afraid of monsters. They would run straight up to them. They'd hit him with the hammer. They'd hit him with the pickaxe. And because they did like program usually in some sort of like minor damage amount to the weapon, and because it would be used to, I don't know, like break boxes or whatever, um, players would just kill the monsters. And they were like, well, we don't want that. So for our next game, we're just there's nothing like that. There is nothing you can do to harm the monster in Amnesia, because that's not the point of the game. But it was so interesting because it was such a hard design shift away from, well, it's kind of a Resident Evil, but your weapons are bad, to no, 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 no. Your job is to run. Like you are not fighting this thing. Period. You cannot do anything to fight this creature. Like that was a real paradigm shift for them. And I think about that a lot, especially when we're talking about horror and in video games, because I think horror in video games is often sort of fighting with a sort of player verb set dynamic of like, well, the player always has to be able to do something, but that's not how horror works. Like in horror movies, right? Like the feeling of a horror movie is one where the characters, for either a constructed or a legitimate reason, cannot fight the creature. Um, and sometimes there's, inversions of that, or they play with the concept, but by and large, that's usually what it's about, is that the creature is impenetrable and you just have to run. But games, I think, have struggled a lot to uh, replicate that feeling. So I don't know. It was a thing I was definitely thinking about when I'm looking at things like Nope, like that one, like the Gordy scene in Nope, and in other horror things. Yeah, I don't know. I loved Nope. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, and like I would strongly encourage anyone to see it. I feel bad for Peel because apparently they are forcing a second movie out of that. And
Yeah,
um
yeah, yeah,
either I don't know where that's gonna go because he never wanted a second movie, but they've I'm as my very small understanding of how these kind of things work. Um, I just hope that whatever the trade-off was for him to do another one was something that he will feel was worth it.
yeah.
And I say that in the
You
sense
know,
of I think Jason Bateman, I think is his name. He did Arrested Development. Uh,
yeah,
the trade-off for him, as I understood it, as I read, and this could be completely wrong, but I read that he agreed to Arrested Development if he could come and do the other series that had 3 seasons, maybe more at this point. I don't remember.
yeah,
Where he was, uh, part of a drug cartel. And now he's in like hiding. I can't remember the name of that series right now. But
yeah,
as I understood, like that was the trade-off, right? Like you do this, you do this for us, we'll let you do this, or we'll let this go through, and you can,
yeah,
run it. And I'm
yeah,
hoping that if that's the case for Nope 2, that it is something that he can be happier with or proud of. Like I'm not saying I hope he's not proud of whatever comes of Nope 2. I'm just saying I hope that based on what he originally said, that if Nope 2 was in that kind of scenario, that whatever happens because of it is also something that is going to be something great that he gets to like
yeah.
really pour himself into,
I think that there's a lot of again, to talk about IP, to talk about which I hate that word because it's very business-like, but there's no real better way to talk about this. I think to talk about shared universes, maybe. Um, Nope is a movie that was built to be a movie. And I think it works really well because of that. It's poetic, right? It has a beginning and it has a middle and it has an end, and the end is a rhyme of the beginning, right? Um, that's not a spoiler if you skip past here, don't worry. But like there, I think what is really difficult is creating a follow up to things that were built to be a singular work, and not either weakening the original work or weakening the following work by, I don't know, not being able to stand on its own. I think that's a really difficult task. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's really difficult. Um, Especially, of course, when the first object in the media franchise is so good, like I think Nope is. Um, it I think it requires teasing out threads from the original that were perhaps latent or perhaps could be gleaned through something. I think a good example of this actually is Mad Max Fury Road, where it's a sequel to a series that didn't exist for like 30 years after the last one, right? And then they decide to make the sequel. And I think what it does really well is it teases out something that was really latent in the original films, which was this idea of Max as a wanderer. And it attempts to build on that as like, well, what does that mean? Like, he's a wanderer, so what? Like, does he not have connections? Does he make connections at all? What does that look like? What would a healthy relationship for the man Max Rockatansky actually look like? And I think Fury Road attempts to answer that question, and I think it does really well. That's one of my favorite movies, but it's one of those things where it's like I think it does really well at being a sequel because it stands on its own, but it also is drawing on the history that it is a sequel to.
And you saying that kind of makes me like, well, one, obviously, yes, because Mad Max had such a long kind
Yeah,
of jump between them that, there was the ability to kind of reinvent and refocus.
yeah,
But I think in some cases, um, a sequel can and will put like that main character as a secondary, only because
yeah,
At
Yeah.
that point, they're just the drive. Like as you said, like he's a wanderer. At that point,
Yeah.
he's the drive that figuratively and literally the
Yes.
drive for going from point A to
From
point
movie
B
to
for
movie.
to the
Yeah.
to the next thing that's just leading in. He's
Yep.
just he's a part of it. And in some
The Mad Max
cases,
films are basically anthologies, right? Like
yeah.
they're anthology films.
Um, but yeah, like in his case, it's really he's just experiencing it as you would expect
Yes. Yeah.
of like a Western, for example, like a spaghetti
Hmm.
Western. You didn't really have a main character that was driving everything. It was always like
Yeah.
well, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, like
Yeah.
I forget the name of the trilogy, the way that everyone
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
categorizes those three. But like Clint Eastwood's character, he always just wandered into a mess. And
Hmm.
kind of the same for Mad Max. He just wandered into a mess because let's be honest, in a lawless land,
Yeah.
things are probably always on the edge of south, and someone wandering into town is probably going to be the thing that maybe pushes it
Pushes
over
something
that
over.
edge just because they don't know the dance, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
know, you don't say, you don't ask about the sheriff's daughter or the, you
Yeah.
know, or whatever, right? You don't, he doesn't know that. And he asks about it. And then suddenly, you know, bang, 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 the match has been lit. And now the
Yep.
powder keg is going to blow, right?
Completely.
Um, But yeah, so Dante, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. You know, I know you have, you know, you
Yeah.
said
It's
like
too
you
bad.
have time, but at the same time, I don't, you know, I want to be respectful of that. I want to let you enjoy
Totally.
your weekend, and you know, get to some games, read, watch some movies, read some manga,
Absolutely.
or what have you. So I do want to let you go. However, at the same time, I want to, you know, I want to give you a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I was just gonna say, you got any last questions you want to hit me with? I mean, I know we've been going long on all these, but I'm more than happy to answer.
Well, sure. Actually, you know, I'll hit you with this, and
Sure.
I'm not gonna go with game related ones because you know
Sure.
what,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know, let's, you know, on the topic of talking about who you are and not game related, let's keep that going. Earlier you had said that you know, one of the things you like a lot about graphic novels or manga is
Mhm.
that they are kind of more condensed, more packaged in terms of stories, in terms of how they're presented, that they're not always going to rely on you reading every last thing for the
Yeah.
last 6 months to make sense of it, or what have you.
Yeah.
With that in mind, then, do you have any graphic novel or manga recommendations that you've been enjoying that you think other people might also enjoy?
I mean, I already talked about Kate Beaton's Ducks. Highly recommend that. That's probably the one that's foremost on my mind here. But other than that, I've been working my way through the I don't actually know the actual name for it, but the Kaguya series, the manga series. I'm gonna look this up. Kaguya-sama Love is War, which is I knew it originally because of an anime. And the anime is really really great. Probably one of the funniest anime currently airing in my opinion. Um, but the manga itself, which I've been working through slowly, is also really really fun. It's a high school comedy romance thing. If you like that, you'll probably really like Kaguya. Uh, yeah, that's probably my easiest recommendation for sure.
Awesome. And if I'm not mistaken, just I did a quick click.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's the series I think that got a lot of gifs, I'm gonna say, of the end
Yes.
credits or something of the one girl dancing that's
Because
like
there's the
ridiculously
Chica
smooth.
dancing. Yes, the Chica dancing scene. Yeah, I think originally, like a couple years back when the anime premiered, there was a lot of talk about how it is just impeccably animated, and it super is. It's impeccably animated, and also it's like impeccably animated in just a very over the top way about what the actual show is, which is this like duel of affections between these two main characters, and it's always like over the top animated. So if it's a conflict of one of them wanting to ask the other one out, it's going to be animated in the form of like a antique or antique, like a vintage like war scenario or something. I don't know. It's very fun. That's kind of the shtick of the series, is this visual encapsulation of the way that trying to ask someone out in high school feels like. So I just think it's really fun. It has a very good cast of characters.
Yeah, thank you for the recommendation. I haven't seen it, so I can't speak too much of it. I'm not gonna lie, the only
Understandable.
thing I am aware of is that dance scene.
The Chica dance, the infamous Chica dance. Yeah.
And I asked about it to some people that were more aware of it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's rotoscoped." And
It
um,
is. Yeah, I think so.
all I can say is rotoscoping when done well is absolutely fantastic. And I don't mean that against
Yeah.
people that use rotoscoping for their own
Oh yeah.
projects or what have you. Like, right,
You're right.
the
Yeah.
I'm sure that other people do rotoscoping for the like I forget the name of the guy that does all the rotoscoping for his comedy videos. Like I'm not saying when I say rotoscoping when done well is great, I'm not saying anything against him because his like
Yeah.
he's doing what he's doing. That's an intentional artistic direction, right?
Of course. Of
Um
course.
what I'm meaning is like um I forget the name of the series. Flowers of something or other. It did horrible rotoscoping and it was incredibly disappointing because it was a psychological thriller kind of series, and the the manga for it, it's the author that did it did some other real psychological things that are fantastic, and like people were so hyped for it, and then I was so hyped for it, and like I didn't even bother watching it because of
You just didn't like the look. Yeah.
how cheap the rotoscoping looked. And like that
It's
comes
understandable.
from someone that really enjoyed Knights of Sidonia, which is using like
Yeah.
PS2 style cell shaded animation
Similar. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
graphics.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um so like
100%.
that's yeah, so it blew my mind just that the budget that must have went into just that one scene, because
Yeah.
like hot damn, if anyone hasn't seen, as you call it, the Chica dance, if anyone hasn't
Yes.
seen
Yeah.
that, you should go
It's a
see
really,
it.
it's a really fun scene. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't know the context of it. I think it might be the ending. I don't know. Context or whatever doesn't matter. You should watch it just to marvel at technical um technical, like what was accomplished because of just how disgustingly smooth that
Yes.
was. You
Yeah.
know? Um I'm sorry. It's a weird path to go down there. I'm sorry, but
No, you're right. I mean, I think for a lot of folks that was like the main thing that they knew the show for, which like that dance is great. I highly recommend watching the rest of it if you just want like a very, very funny modern anime. That's my opinion.
well, I'm gonna add that to my list. I don't get to watch as much anime now just because
Yeah,
the time is time.
completely. Yes.
I'm 35 now at time, right?
Very
Time.
understandable. Yes.
Um, but I'm gonna add that to my list because it's I've seen it recommended before. You're recommending it, so yeah, I'm gonna write that down, and it can, like games, it can be thrown into the pile and maybe one day get grabbed. I
Very
am
real.
gonna ask about this one though, just because
Yeah,
it is one that I really enjoyed, and I'm curious if you watched it since you said hey, you have a few extra minutes. Let's throw some more stuff out there.
totally.
Um, Chainsaw Man. Have you read or seen anything on that
I have. I read the first, whatever it was, like 100 issues, which was the first run of
arc?
the
I guess
manga.
the real arc, I
Um,
guess you'd say.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I read the first arc, and I've read like a little bit of what I believe is officially called Chainsaw Man 2, which is the sequel arc. Um, I thought it was okay. I have to say, I think I was not nearly as over the moon about it as a lot of my friends were, and I respect their opinions, but it was just okay for me. I think it was an interesting. It's an interesting manga. I really love a lot of the visual work on it. I think I was less enamored with many of the plot decisions made, and I watched a couple episodes of the anime, but not that many. And I probably will finish the anime at some point, just because it's such a cultural moment of a thing. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was okay. Thought it was okay. It was just okay to me. I don't know.
And
That's my Chainsaw Man opinion.
that's absolutely fair. Like, and I'm not gonna, like, look, I said this before. It's not my place to judge anyone's decisions. Like
Yeah.
for me, I've as I've gotten older, I've really kind of shifted to like the gates are open as an approach.
Yeah, totally.
So like far be it from me to try and argue that you're wrong because no, you're not. I'm not you. Like
Yeah,
I don't need to sell you on what I like, right? Just
yeah,
like other people, like if someone's not interested in something in general, like you don't it doesn't have to be your mission to sell them
yeah,
on it.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
you can make your passionate pitch, which don't get me wrong, I'm about to do a very rough one of. But like you've already read it. You've read enough of it to
Yeah.
know.
Oh yeah.
For me, I think the for the animated thing is I'm mostly on board just because Denji is such an idiot and I want to
Oh
see more
yeah.
of it, you know?
Yeah. Valid.
And and I would encourage other people if they are feeling like it's okay, it's a series. Um, I would encourage other people to just keep watching or to read some of it just to
Yep.
see how much of an idiot he is because he it those scenes animated and I don't know because you've read it. I'm sure that
Yeah.
there's some dumb scenes that you're also probably aware of could probably look cool. But for me and
Yeah.
I don't I'm going to do a small spoiler, but I don't it's not really a spoiler. But the I'm personally I could fall off watching it after this scene. I'm not going to lie. If I never watch it again after they animate this scene, my life is good. But I am right now currently just living to see the scene where the other fiend thing with the shark head, where
Yeah.
they're falling off like I don't know like a 20-story building, and suddenly says, "Can't you use your chains to grab us?" And then proceeds to surf on the shark
Yep.
through the air while Spider-Maning through the buildings. I'm not going to lie. That, like I said, after that scene, if I never watch any more of it, I'm good. My life will be complete in terms of what I need from Chainsaw Man, and that is to
Yeah.
see those two idiots doing that.
Yeah.
But like I
100%.
said, I'm not, if you like, if anyone doesn't like it, that's fine. That's my passionate pitch.
Yeah.
Watch
Yeah.
it to
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
these two, like watch it to see how absolutely stupid some of the interactions of
Yeah.
characters are. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's about it. Like I said, I'm not gonna, I don't, I'm not gonna try and sell it to you. You know what you like. You've already
Yeah.
said, but other people that if you're on the fence, Denji's an idiot.
Yeah.
Just enjoy it.
100%.
If you're on the fence, just enjoy how stupid that idiot is. He's so damn dumb. Um, but yeah, anyway, Dante, like I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to
Sure.
let you get on with your day. However, if there was anything else you did want to throw out there, like a cool game that you recently played that we might not talked about, other things that you're doing that you feel you can talk about, or just something that you feel more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. And, please
Yeah.
let everyone know where they can find more information about you, because I'll also include that in the episode description.
Totally. Final little recommendations. One, I recently finished playing through Pentiment. If you are a history dork at all, like I am, you probably will absolutely love Pentiment. It is gorgeous. It is amazingly well written. I think it's if it's not my number one game of the year, I haven't written up any list or whatever for last year. Maybe I will. But if it's not my number one game of the year, it's probably in the top three. It is just a amazing video game experience. Highly, highly recommend that. My other video game recommendation is you should play Get in the Car Loser by Christine Love. Not just because I consulted on it, but because it's good. It's a very fun game. It's very great. I love Christine's output. She's wonderful. I highly recommend checking it out. Um, as far as my own personal plugs, like I said, my name's Dante. If you find someone online called Video Dante, chances are it's me. Um, I am on Twitter still, as twitter.com/Video Dante. I say with a big sigh, I barely ever check that account anymore, and I'm basically actively trying to migrate off of it. But if you still use Twitter and would like to keep up with at least major events in my life, I will probably post them on there until the site dies. Um, but for more personal or just informal communication stuff, I am on cohost.org. As cohost.org/Dante and also as cohost.org/Video Dante for kind of a it's my personal and my fancy pants professional posts accounts, basically. Co-host is great. If you aren't familiar with it, it's very similar to Tumblr. It's made by a cooperative. I know some of the folks on that cooperative. I am extremely biased about saying I think it's one of the cooler sites to come out of the past few years. So if you want to follow me on there, cohost.org/Dante or /videodante. And that's me. That's where you can find me. So yeah.
So, thank you. And I will include those links. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm going to drop this one because, I can't just let you get away with that one. You said your top 3 games, that Pentiment's probably up there within the top 3. What are the other 2? I can't let you get away with that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, hang on. I need to consult my list real quick here. Okay, so yeah, definitely Pentiment is on there. I'm not sure exactly where, but it's on there. Other games that are probably going to make it in the top in no particular order. Neon White's probably going to be in there. Neon White, incredible stuff. Beautiful game. Amazing. Super fun to play. Probably going to throw in, let me see. Probably going to throw in Escape Academy. It is a really fun multiplayer, I think it's 1 to 4 players, virtual escape room game that I played a lot with my partner. Since we're long distance, we play a lot of fun little escape room games and stuff on Steam. This one is by far the best. It has a story mode. It has like a full ass like visual novel thing. It's just really fun. It's really gorgeously illustrated, and the puzzles are really fun. They're cool. And then Immortality is probably going to end up somewhere on the list. I like Immortality a lot. And it is a cool game. And then finally, probably the weirdest pick for me specifically is there's a non-zero chance that Red Dead Redemption 2 will end up in my top list. Rockstar for crunching, but that game is really cool. And I think there's some actually really interesting narrative stuff that it does. I really liked the characters. I really liked a lot of the stuff in it. And then the last thing would probably be Unpacking, which was a cute little indie game about unpacking your home, and it's got gorgeous pixel art. I just had a really good time with it.
Well, awesome. So thank you for that. And like I said, the moment you mention a top and then kind of ignore the
I
rest,
know.
I couldn't let that one go.
Because I don't have the list. Yeah, I'm spitballing, but yeah, some of those games, almost all those games will probably be on there. I don't know which order, and probably some more games too.
But no, so yeah, Dante, thank you for the list. Thank you for
No problem.
the very fun talk. I know we started talking about Marvel and not much games until that was out, but thank you. I appreciate the the on the spot top 3 as as well as everything else. And however, if there wasn't anything else, like I said, I will let you go. I'll let you get on with your day. Enjoy your weekend of doing
Thank you.
choicefully doing nothing.
Absolutely.
And relax.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else that I need to get to. So I appreciate the time. This was really fun. I love chatting with you.
Yeah, awesome. And I thank you. I appreciate your kind words. It was fantastic speaking with you. I as well. I really appreciate it, and I had a lot of fun too.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much.
And thanks again to Dante for making time to have this conversation with me. And thank you for joining us on Red Tunic Podcast. And a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news. And be sure to share it with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks. Until next time.